Obviously, the words attitude adjustment aren't found in the Bible. Neither the word attitude nor adjustment can be found, at least in the King James Version. But there's a story that I'd like to share with you a little bit that I think is a really good illustration of just this, an attitude adjustment. However, again, remember, it doesn't come out and say that this event happened as a result of a bad attitude on the part of God's people, nor does it say that God then, because of that bad attitude, had to adjust it. But in reality, as we look at this passage, at least for me, it is exactly what we see. Exodus, the book of Exodus in itself, tells us the story of God's deliverance from the people out of the bondage from the Egyptians. And in chapter 17, our event that I think illustrates an attitude adjustment is recorded in that chapter, chapter 17. And the first 7 verses talk about an event that took place at a spot called Rephidim. They had followed God's commands, and he had led them to this spot in the desert, and there was a little problem when they got there. There was no water. They had nothing to drink. This is a desert, and they were very thirsty. And that's where their bad attitude became very obvious and reared its ugly head. We're told that they grumbled, and they complained, and they worried about where they were going to get something to drink, even though they had seen God's miracles when he delivered them out of Egypt, when they crossed the Red Sea, and he fed them with manna from heaven. Well, we read here, the people started complaining to Moses. Give us some water, Moses. Give us some water. Moses replied, why are you complaining to me? And trying to put the Lord to the test. But the people were thirsty and kept on complaining. And Moses, they said, did you bring us out of Egypt just to let our families and our animals die of thirst? Now, I won't take the time to apply this truth other than to say this. I'm sure as you're listening, you can think of many times when God has done wonderful things for you personally, things for you and to you and through you, and yet time and time again, you and I, when we're faced with difficult, hard situations like these people had, no water to drink, our tendencies are exactly like theirs. We tend to grumble and complain. Well, anyway, back to our story. Moses prayed and God gave him some direction. And now here's where our story then starts and the attitude adjustments come in. God gave Moses directions, and he took his rod and he struck a rock, and they were provided with water. They had grumbled, they had complained to God, but despite that, God was gracious, kind, and he provided their water for them, but they still had this bad attitude. And despite that attitude, not because of it, but just God just loved them enough, and he gave them this water that they needed. And then the next event that happens right after that awful attitude towards God is told in Exodus 17, starting at verse 8. And this is the attitude adjustment part. By the way, my idea of an attitude adjustment is simply something that happens in our lives that sort of refocuses our attention in a different direction. And it gets our minds and our thinking off of the current situation and the bad attitude that we had because of that, and points us to a different situation, and actually gives us an opportunity to change our attitude, to adjust it, and to develop a better attitude. So I guess the new development could be pretty bad for us. It could be maybe a broken leg or a car wreck or your house burned down or something. But I think, as in this story, the way God gives us attitude adjustments is that he often allows things to develop that aren't necessarily bad. They have a good outcome, like in this story, but they just turn our focus and our attention elsewhere. So we read here, then Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Now we know a couple things about Amalek, the tribe. We know that they were descendants of the grandson of Esau. That's one thing. Secondly, we also know something about the mindset of the Amalekites. We're actually told their tactics and their strategy for warfare. You know, a lot of times countries have different, and groups of people have certain tactics that they use and they're known for, like the kamikazes during the World War II, the Japanese pilots who flew their planes right into the decks on a suicide mission and blew up as many people as they could. In Vietnam, there was the infamous Viet Cong who had these miles and miles of tunnels underground, and they would attack and then retreat, and they couldn't be caught and couldn't be defeated because they kept hiding in these tunnels. And there were other things that they did. Other countries today, and there's modern, quote, modern warfare where they use biological and chemical warfare. Well, we're told the Amalekites had a tactic that was just as diabolical, just as evil. We read, people of Israel, do you remember what the Amalekites did to you after you came out of Egypt? You were tired, and they followed along behind, attacking those who could not keep up with the others. This showed that the Amalekites have no respect for God. So, where do you suppose they got this idea to attack the weakest and the attack when the enemy was the tiredest and exhausted and attack from behind rather than face them head on? Well, my suspicion, my assumption is an obvious one. I think it was the evil one, Satan himself. He lies, he cheats, he deceives, and he does everything he can to be as devious as he can. And just as a little sidebar, maybe this can serve as a reminder or a warning that the next time you're tired and exhausted and fatigued and worn out, or maybe straggling behind in your personal prayer life or your personal Bible study, that's when you're vulnerable. And that's when Satan would love to attack you, and probably does. But back to our story here. After Moses prayed, God gave him some direction. We read, Moses said to Joshua, choose us out men and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. And Joshua did this. His job was to choose out certain men and go to battle. But Moses told Joshua also, look, I have a job too. I'm going to be standing on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. And many people, me included, feel that this rod was sort of a symbol of reliance and trust upon God. As Moses stood there on that hill, holding the rod up towards God, the soldiers that were in the battle could look up and be reminded that it's pointing up, God's our reliance, God's our strength. God can fight for us and give us the strength and the wisdom and the courage and everything necessary. And I think it's also not just reliance and trust upon Him, but it's a symbol of prayer, of an intercessory prayer. As Moses prayed, held up the rod, he was saying, God, I'm asking you for the strength and to do this. Not just we're trusting you, but we're asking you to give us this. And he was praying on behalf of the soldiers on the battlefield. And and this is exactly how prayer works. You and I may not be in full-time ministry on a foreign mission field, pastoring a church, teaching Sunday school class, leading a worship service, but I believe that we can have a vital role in all of these and many more ministries through the service and the ministry of intercessory prayer. Now look what happened as Moses did his part. We read, Joshua did as Moses had said, and he fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And it happened when Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, but when he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. And I really, truly believe, and I'm sure you do, but we don't always act like it, that our prayers, your prayers, or lack of prayers, directly affects other believers and other ministries. And we were given a little more detail here. We read on further. Moses' hands became heavy, and they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur held up his hands, the one on one side, the one on the other, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. So here's two more people involved. Now, you know, my wife is a real prayer warrior. She prays for hours. It's her ministry. I'm not a prayer warrior, much to my shame, but I know this, and so because of that, there's times when I just pray for Donna. I pray that God would give her encouragement, God would give her strength, God would give her clarity of mind, keep her awake so that she can pray, and I become either an Aaron or her, holding up her hands as she's holding up her hands to God in prayer. And we can all be involved somewhere along this chain of prayer and intercessory prayer. Well, the end of the story is a happy one. Joshua defeated Amalek and his people by the edge of the sword, and Jehovah said to Moses, write this in a memorial in a book and set it in the ears of Joshua. So when God allows events to unfold in your life that seem to be refocusing your attention and trying to change your attitude, look for the possibilities to find the victory through the battle and the prayer that's needed to sustain the battle. And allow God to adjust your attitude. Thank you.